Hey everyone, welcome back to the Investor's Guide to Joy. I am here today with Steve Wallace, who's a transformational leader, and I would say as far as coach and mentor, for individuals that he's been with and even what he's currently doing in the sales realm. I'll have him talk about more of that. But Steve, thanks for being on. Excited to have a breadth of different topics that we can really shoot from.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Excited to be talking with you guys. I'm a fan.
Yeah. So one of the big things that stood out, because there have been several, is this idea of like starting over. So you mentioned like for, some of your career before we were like coming on and from what I've had a chance to learn is that, you were in the insurance industry and really had to kind of like start over from different like non-competes, NDAs, things like that. One thing I found that's been, challenging in my life, especially for me being primarily analytical, and I say that from taking like StrengthsFinder 2.0. Have you taken that test or heard of it before?
Not StrengthsFinder, but I'm familiar with, the personality tests that diagnose, your
Sure.
what you think. And I think a lot of us suffer from analysis and even analysis paralysis sometimes. So I'm sure even if I'm not wired the same way, I can appreciate where you're coming from.
Yeah, certainly. And so in a short explanation, that actually just transformed like how I was living and going about my life. I started my career initially in commercial real estate software sales, then went into commercial real estate selling, and then ventured into basically product management, co-founding a company and working with software developers to build software. And it was because I basically took this test that said your number one strength is analytical. And you also can collaborate people together and you can see the uniqueness in people and communicate that through and make sure they feel included and those kind of things, which at least from my perspective was just like not sales. It was more kind of like a CRO type thing of, hey, look at where trend is going, or what is the one thing that we could do that we could just bring like hundreds of customers over. It wasn't dialing for dollars. To say another way that I found, by leaning on strengths, that's been incredibly impactful for me, right? To your point of like taking tests, it's just like understanding yourself more, right? You then feel more confident, comfortable. Hey, I operate this way, or I like things this way. You can kind of, float the boat, if you will, even though as it's rocking, but especially after you're going after big goals, especially for people like in sales, entrepreneurship, things like that. They have these big, lofty, crazy goals, either, their own goals or like, God-sized type goals, right? That the idea of starting over is, debilitating, challenging, mentally, emotionally, physically. I mean, in some ways, kind of, spiritually. And it seems like you've been able to not just do it, right? But go through it. It reminds me of like buffaloes that whenever they're in tornadoes, they go like through storms versus like cows and kind of other animals like kind of, run away. And it's just like a different heart posture and intention. So wanted to give you space to like share a little bit more about maybe the context of those starting over pieces. And also just like how did your mindset and like emotional capacity maybe grow over those different times? Because I would assume they kind of like stacked upon each other, right? Or what did that kind of turn into?
Yeah, fantastic question. You probably know this ahead of time, but a loaded question too. So you'll have to extend some grace my way as I try to keep it, short and sweet for you. But
I would say keep it to what is like the most impactful, right? Because I mean, there just have been, by golly, like periods in my life where it's like, a shorter way to say, in 2018, when I was co-founding a company, I was like $2,000 above of what I made that year from like poverty. And I was thinking of like going to do food stamps and things like that. And like, that was coming from silly good, salary jobs where I bought, my first property at 22 or 3, let's say. My point is like, it was very much a starting over, moving back into a parent's house. I've done that like 3 times now for different situations. Like I very much resonate with this. And I've found that I've been able to bounce back, overcome, dive more into myself and faith, and would say, take the time and fill the space that you feel would be beneficial for kind of your former self or other people that you know. So
sure. Love that guidance. So I would say to start off with like most impactful was it all kind of started with a book called Who Moved My Cheese. Okay. If you haven't read it, I recommend you read it. Anybody listening, I recommend you read it. And the reason being is because It is a book that you can read in 1 hour. I'm not joking, maybe two, depending on your process
Okay.
and speed. Like I'm a slow reader, so 2 hours. But at the end of the book, I was crying. And the reason being is because it very, very quickly diagnosed the personality type that I had, which is somebody who complains about change. And that is like a
Mm.
victim mentality. And confronted with that reality, I was like, I am no longer going to be this. Now, this was a long time ago, but what it did do was put me in touch with that reality so that I can change, right? And so that was at a point in my life where I was in school for business, where I fell in love in entrepreneurship. But it wasn't until years later where I got to apply the lesson from that book for the first time. Maybe not for the first time, but for the first truly significant time.
Mhm.
So to walk you through the story a little bit, I started at an insurance agency, did pretty well. I was rookie of the year there, not because I was a sales god or anything like that, but because I would talk to literally anyone and anything. You could tell me to make friends with a wall and I would do it, right? And in that industry, people like to work with those they trust. So you have to
Mhm.
be friendly and trustworthy and do what you say you'll do.
Yep. Okay.
The
Yeah.
thing is, I didn't have that trust factor at that agency. I looked for more teamwork and collaboration. I like to be around people. It didn't have it. So I left there and went to two more looking for the right culture. And along the way, two more agencies in 2 more years. What that means is I had two different books of business that I had reset, really three that I built from scratch by all things said and done. And in that industry, you have to sign non-competes. You
Hmm.
have to do a pretty darn good job of not reaching out to previous customers to flip them into your new book of business, because in the industry that's called churning, and on
Yep.
many measures that's it's illegal or at least frowned on. So what that forced me to do, because if I did my job the right way in the first time, I wouldn't need to do it again the second or third time in a couple of years, right? So what that forced me to do was become really good at prospecting and really good at sales and collaborating with others. And I did. So I really hit my stride at the third company I was at. I was a leaderboard producer, eventually promoted to a manager where I was responsible for hiring and training, and things are looking fun. Things are looking good. I have
Hmm.
my career, I have my success, I'm running my own personal production. And next thing you know, the agents that I'm training start becoming pretty darn good at their job too, which is exactly my goal, right? So I start to think to myself, wow, there's an opportunity here for my agency to be this recruiting hub, a new revenue stream that perhaps my agency hasn't thought of before. So I presented some data based on my experiences to my agency leadership. And all said and done, at the end of that meeting, and this is where the who moved my cheese comes in, the leadership basically laughed at me. And to kind of elaborate on what I shared with you before, Paul,
Yeah.
they did was they said, no, this is not going to be how you're going to be successful, even though I already was using those methods. You're going to be
Hmm.
spread thin, focused on your own production. And they planted seeds of doubt in my brain that really made me question my own gut instincts, things that I really were driven to do for myself and to help others. I thought to myself, this is a no brainer. Why wouldn't they even provide a little bit of support on this? And they didn't. And what that caused was this long, about a year of me just sitting in this proverbial seat, this position that I had unhappily, kind of hemming and hawing about the change that I knew had to come, but that I wouldn't take any action on. And this is where it goes back to who moved my cheese. In that book, there are four mice, each with a different mentality about how they embrace change. One seeks it out aggressively before change is necessary. The other one is a slightly scaled down version of it, but agrees with change. The third one resists change, but will accept it eventually. And the fourth one will never change and will sit there and play the victim mentality. And I had long fixed that part of my personality, but it took me about a year for me to figure out, shoot, I'm sitting here hemming and hawing about
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Right. And so finally, I realized that what had happened to me was I had discovered that I find revenue streams and ways to help people in different ways. I had discovered that I was way more of an entrepreneur than I ever thought I was.
Cool.
And it was not a light switch that could be turned back off. It was not like a Hoover Dam. It couldn't be held back anymore. Right. And
Yeah.
so I finally decided to leave. And at the same exact time, a mentor of mine gave me an opportunity to head up sales as his chief revenue officer, which is really interesting because now, just by kind of the stars aligning and the way God works, right? I was now in a position to elevate others, train others, sell, work hard, and do all the things I wanted to do at the agency. But now I had free reign.
Yeah, absolutely. The conjunction of the word and, right, is such a powerful like multiplier that it's to say, hey, I can do this and right, like it multiplies on it. That's so great to hear and see, especially as that like comes together. Because I've oftentimes found like, I do this thing and I do this thing, and it's like, how does this relate? Will it relate? I don't know. I'm, stressed or annoyed or whatever the situation might be or the season might be, right? But it's this idea of like, surprisingly, change is inevitable. Like things will change. Like that is the part of growth in life. And it's, accepting it, understanding it, going with it, flowing with it. The person that you once were will not continue to be the person that you become, even if you like push against it and resist it. Because I've seen that in different ways that people are resistant, to change, kind of to your point. You mentioned you kind of unlocked yourself as like an entrepreneur, and I'm curious about this. I've always found myself being entrepreneurial. I asked my mother kindly for $10,000 when she took me to a like invention patent office when I was like 8 or 10. She was like, wow, this is a great learning opportunity. Like, thanks so much. We're going to go now. And so I've always had that like just thought process, right, of like being an entrepreneur. So to me, it's not necessarily like new or unlocked. I felt like it was just like identity of sorts. And I do mindset coaching with current entrepreneurs and like, aspiring entrepreneurs. So I'm curious, like, do you feel or think that becoming now the entrepreneur that you are, right, and identify as, was it just like finding the key and unlocking it? Was it more like a puzzle you had to build and then you like look at that photo? Or maybe even an analogy of you looked at kind of an image like a different way and you're like, whoa, like that is different, like, or something else that maybe comes to be. I'm curious how it showed up for you.
Sure. So I think we're actually very similar in the sense that we're analytical. And for me, the analytical side showed up to maybe even use your example and bring it into this explanation. Like I was trying to analytically put the puzzle pieces together in such a way that could explain my exit from the agency into something that I was going to create for myself. And I could never quite put the pieces together. It was always going to involve a leap of faith. Always. And I think it's how things are always going to be, no matter what we do. Very few of us have that much planned out, right? If we had it all planned out, why would we even need our faith anyway?
Well, it goes the way that it, intends to, right? Like, because I have amazing, beautiful strategies, right?
Right. Correct. So, but to answer your question, for me, what happened was I had this epiphany that I'm over planning. And there's this phrase that every now and again I forget to remember. And it's, if you keep doing what you always did, you'll keep getting what you always got. And that stands true for years and years and years. So my mantra became do the work or do the thing, no matter how simple, just do the next right thing. And that's what I did. So do the thing or do the work completely conflicted with trying to plan out all these individual puzzle pieces. It was just do the next thing. And I'm like, do the next thing means I can't plan everything out. One step at a time doesn't mean 10 steps. And I couldn't bring the two together, which told me that I was exercising two different sides of my brain and I had to entertain one of them, not both.
Yeah, certainly. It reminds me of one of the most profound things that I've come to realize thus far in my life. And it's that the most beautiful, incredible, amazing, fantastic things that I've experienced or enjoyed have been unexpected.
Yes.
And so I could not have even have planned how they could have turned out in the way or to the extent or things like that. And, from a faith perspective, it's then to also say, like, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? As well as I think of like, who am I to then lean on like my own understanding as well, right? Another, Bible verse to then say, oh, hey, think of sales, right? And oftentimes there's a commissionable component. Hey, I'm going to make 6 figures this year, right? Well, what if actually like there's a plan and purpose and opportunity for you to make 7, but you're so focused on just that knowing and what you believe is what like will happen or like should happen instead of like what is possible. And it's a difference of like your mind versus like the infinite and abundance and unknown and this thing called belief. And so at least, to share, like for me, it's then been like, I would use my analytical skills to like evaluate in situations, but not in terms of expectations, right? It's not a, hey, I could look at 50 more real estate deals when I know now's not the time to do real estate. And I say that because that's kind of coming up for me a little bit of maybe, selling some property or whatnot. And it's like looking at it 12 more times on Excel spreadsheet isn't going to, change, right? If waiting is what's called upon, then I need to wait. And I'm, delaying the, inevitable, and I'm not focusing on the right things and things like that. To your point, in the sense of taking action, right? Like I'm sure you didn't hit some of those, rookie of the year type numbers by not starting the walk, right? To walk a mile, you must, take steps towards it.
Except,
Yeah. And it's fascinating how, some of this is kind of coming up. I was writing a little bit more of my proposal with, aspiring entrepreneurs and whatnot and, tweaking it. And I wrote like, becoming an entrepreneur is the most difficult thing you will ever strive for and become. It involves change not only of your mind, your habits, but also your thoughts, language, your frame of reference, who you associate with, and how you show up in the present moment. Wanted to just see like, how does that land with you? Maybe anything to add or just like comments or thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I would add to it, and you probably already said it, maybe I'm just saying it differently, is our response to how people perceive us needs to change as well. Because I'll tell you what, I've been misunderstood pretty much my entire life, and I didn't realize it was because I constantly think about business and entrepreneurship. Like, ask my wife, it is a love language of mine. There are priorities in my life, and it is family, faith, family, friendship, and then business. Like, it is it's very, very close to the top. It's 1D, and I can talk business all day, and I always have been. Whereas when I'm out with my friends, I tend to just go back to, hey, how do I help you? Solution driven. You could probably do this on your own. At the moment, I'm trying to connect a dear friend of ours with a human resources consultant because I believe my friend would experience more joy from doing the same thing. And that's just how I'm wired. So for a long time, I've been misunderstood.
Yeah.
People would kind of roll their eyes like, oh, here's Steve goes talking about sales. I think we need to change the narrative and just kind of understand that being an entrepreneur sometimes does feel like you're a little bit alone on an island.
Yeah.
But it's not anybody's fault. Just a lot of people aren't cut out for this or don't have interest.
Yeah. And it's also, I found there's a beautiful visualization that I've really admired on this idea of the statue of David was created by chipping away the pieces that like weren't him, to then say like it is a painful, difficult, like pruning process. And it doesn't always have to be like, incredibly difficult and painful, but it certainly has, its challenges, because oftentimes you have the emotions of how things go is then a reflection of you. Oh, they didn't like my proposal. They don't like me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So especially in like the early days and stuff, it's like, no, I'm just not presenting a valuable piece for them to be able to afford and to, make it an easy yes, but an easy yes that still has the value, right? Free is also a yes, but free also, doesn't support, yourself, your family, and gives you the opportunity for then generosity if you, receive nothing. And so it's definitely it's also this concept of like you grow to the level of your like personal development, essentially. And then there's the other one of like you fall to the level of your systems, right? And so those things really, transform that individual. But it's also by like doing the actual work, right? You could read 1,000 books. Also, where does that, kind of get you, right? You can have a different perspective, but you also need to, row the boat. So in terms of like doing the work, like have you found maybe there's like tactical, practical things to just stay honed in? Because I find that sales individuals typically have that, mindset and almost like skill to focus more. At the same time, I've found that sales professionals also get silly, easily distracted. So we can talk about that piece, but just curious of, again, like, how do you stay tactical on like doing the work? Hey, you're going to, do a mile, you're walking, you're running. Like, how do you just stay like focused on it?
Sure. So awfully, this might be fortune cookie wisdom, but get outside the problem. Get outside. Okay. You got to go for a walk, separate yourself for 15 to 30 minutes, stand up, get away from your computer, get away from your phone, unplug, just do something to disconnect from whatever cycle is going on in your brain that's stopping you from taking a different kind of action. I'll give you a for instance, because I think those help.
Cool.
A a lot of sales reps these days, they have some kind of system and automation, CRM. They just use something to automate stuff. Constantly, they'll be sending a newsletter type drip, and they'll notice that for one reason or another, the responses to that newsletter shoot down for a month. And they're sitting there with their, their hands in their lap, twiddling their thumbs. And what do I do next? I'll send another newsletter because maybe that'll help. Right. And I'm laughing because I've done it myself. Whereas instead of doing that, how about go into your CRM and call the people, the phone, and say, hey, Paul, I noticed you opened my newsletter, but didn't reply. Curious about what in that newsletter was interesting to you or not, and turn it into a feedback moment and build rapport and use it as an opportunity to go back to sales 101, which is build a relationship with the people you're communicating with. That's one example. Yeah. But there are many, many, many. Is get outside the problem so you can think about a new solution to send a new message in a new way.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah. And I've found that to be true. I've done 75 hard a number of times, and, the dedicated workouts you have to do certainly, are beneficial, but it's not like 45 minutes is like the secret amount of time, right? Sometimes, 5 minutes can certainly do it. I would personally say definitely, the 15 to 30 minute, because it gives more of your mind a break, and it's more of like walking away without your phone, like staring at a wall, right? Or maybe talking to the wall, right? In your case. And so
see what you did there.
Yeah. I was like, have I talked to walls? I don't know. My normal expression is like, yeah, I'm gonna have a exciting weekend sometimes. And I just kind of want to like stare at a wall. And it's a reference to say like, there's been a lot of things going on, and the opportunity to like, do nothing and just like sit and like truly be still and let the thoughts like come, but not like stay, is a very, impactful thing for me, just as a creative problem solving like type person. I was speaking with some guys in Austin I have great relationships with. We get dinner pretty much every Wednesday, and they're high ticket sales agency owners or, coaches or leaders or things like that. These individuals are making, 10 to like 100K a month type thing, or in their agency, they're helping companies grow from like 50K to like 500K months. Right. And so we had this interesting conversation over steaks of all things of like, are salespeople just like ADHD and like ADD, like, they're able to focus so much, but they're also like, off the board and whatnot, and entrepreneurs as well. And for me,
there's a lot of similarity between those two professions.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of like, the emotions and how they show up, and then also how, they kind of execute or goal driven, just kind of pieces. Yeah. And some of like insecurity, self-doubt thing too. And that also pushes them to the extreme of like, I have to be the best. Yep. That is just interesting to, reflect on, to say that like, it is some things that you may feel, think, or even believe, because those are each different things, are like detriments or impediments or things that are like holding you back or snagging you, are also the things that are your, fundamental superpowers, right? And, the awareness of it. So how would you say like you were able to uncover like your, seemingly like superpower in sales and in, training and kind of, growing people?
It's a great question. I uncovered my superpower because I went uncoached and unhelped at one point. So in that first agency where I hit Rookie of the Year, I also failed out. So long story short is, in sales, if you're consistent, which I had a lot of conversations with people. I stumbled into some whales. And I mentioned pretty purposefully early on that I didn't have the skill set to sell or consultatively propose high value insurance to extremely high net worth people, which I stumbled into, Paul. So the next thing you know, I'm sitting in front of 2 or 3 whales that represented 3 times my annual income per client. And here I am, this 20-something kid, barely, I don't even need to shave. You know what I mean? I didn't have any gray hair. I didn't look experienced.
You need more Mountain Dew and coffee. That'll help,
And I needed some help, and because I didn't know how to present the case to a high net worth individual. And when I went to my leadership and I asked for their help, they told me, we'll help when you know it's real. And I said, I have the fact finder. I have the information. I have it all right here. I just don't know how to, that's the extent of my knowledge. I think it's as real as it gets. And they said, okay, get the meeting scheduled. And I said, well, I need the teaser to get them to the meeting. Again, I didn't know sales. I knew how to talk to people. And so they kept on going back and forth in this vicious cycle. Get them scheduled. I don't know how. I ended up chasing those those whales and forgot about the consistent, to use a sports metaphor, singles and doubles that got me to the success levels I was at. And in short, there's no real getting fired in that industry, but like I basically went broke at that time, right? And so I recovered and I was okay, but I went broke, and that really taught me a lesson about leadership and about what's necessary for somebody entering the industry, advancing their skill sets in the industry, the kind of support that people need in general. And I don't know if this answers your question or not, but that experience turned me over the years into who I am today. I still don't have any formal sales coaching or any formal sales training.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's to say that, so like from a sales and then also from my background in like product management, it's then to say there's a difference between pain and discomfort. And as you know, pain, if you truly know the pain, you can also then provide a number of different solutions, prioritize those solutions, and then produce the best product because you truly also are in some ways your own customer of it. That's also with a sense of like, without, ego, because you're, using inputs of other people's. It's not just like, you need this kind of thing. Granted, there is some product management as it relates to like visionary product management, things like Steve Jobs, things like that, where it's like, this is the future, like you need this, you just don't know it type thing. But that aspect of actually, owning and feeling and knowing that pain, then becomes that piece. And I've oftentimes seen that just with people, right? Like some of the nicest, kindest, most genuine people, their stories are just a lot deeper than you would think. And I found in a lot of ways, even just from this podcast, right? It's to say like the pain you go through or trials, tribulations, those experiences, then create more capacity for joy, because if you create space in something, it has to then be filled, right? And so it's an aspect of like, what do you fill it with? And this concept of joy is then to say like, what are the things that bring you joy? Oh, well, like I like feeling empowered and safe and in control and the ability to grow. Well, how can you do that? Well, I need training helps me do that, right? And so those kind of things of then owning that, and then as a leader taking that opportunity to say, hey, no, we should do this, and this can help people as well as be profitable, economical, things like that. In those moments that I mean, maybe you don't have any more seeds of doubt, if you will, as you continued, but from
always do. We all do. I think we all do.
Sure. Yeah. What are, I guess, how do you process those seeds of doubts? And I say process in the sense of like, you could recognize them, right? But maybe it's either tactical or emotional or situational for, those seeds of doubt to not hold on to them for, some extended amount of period of time, especially as you've read, the book of Who Moved My Cheese, right? And not being that, type of mouse that just like kind of sits in it. What does that, look like now from, your experience and what you know?
Sure. So you're right. Originally, I didn't really know how to handle this, but I have a tactical method that I work through that keeps my brain, generally speaking, and like nobody's perfect, but keeps my brain more on a motivated perspective, a motivated path, or at least a consistent path, because motivation is fleeting, right? Motivation is fleeting. What's way more important is consistency, discipline, persistence. So in order to stay consistent and persistent, what I like to do is challenge the two different sides of my brain, and almost every brain works this way. You can't process both positive and negative emotions simultaneously. So what I do is I ask myself a question, Steve, what would you do right now if you were the world's biggest badass and had zero fears? And I literally play out scenarios in my brain, right? I would call this guy and I would make this ask, and I would go to this place and I would do this thing. And I'd say, okay, how would you feel if you did those things? And if the person you asked that big ask said yes, and what would happen with your life if that happened? And I'm taking myself down this positive cycle rabbit hole, right? I also ask myself the question, what would happen if you didn't do anything? If you didn't make any asks? How do you feel right now? This negative space that people find themselves in. And I indulge the negative thought just for a second. And I try to feel it both ways. And you walk yourself through this exercise. If you take the time to study how you feel during each one, your body language will change, your shoulders will hump during the negative, and you'll relax during the positive exercise. And then when you realize is what you've done is you've just trained your brain to go down two different paths that you can't walk simultaneously. And so then at the end of it, I just ask myself, which side do you want to entertain, Steve? You know what I mean? Which emotion do you want to entertain? And the answer is always the positive.
Yeah, certainly. And it reminds me of there's a exercise through kind of psychologist. Basically, it's through putting, and it's an emotional wheel concept being it's like emotions are complex. There's a bunch of them. I could feel sad, but excited, but fearful, like, at the same time, if you will. And I'm writing about this in my book where it's the idea of being the ruler. So to your point, it's like, hey, like I feel great. Also, I don't feel great. I can't. And it's recognizing what those are first and then also having the opportunity to like experience them but not holding on to them because then those become a mood, right? And then that becomes an
Right.
attitude, and that becomes personality. And so it's
Right.
like, yeah, like, am I doing the things that give me the results that I want? No, I'm not. Well, what does that feel like? Yeah, it doesn't feel, great, right? It would feel amazing if, I did this. What actions would I take if I had a, TV film crew follow me around for an inspirational, motivational, type thing, right? Both, in my opinion, both in the sense of like rest as well as work, right? Not every, second of the day is a, rocky scene, even though by golly, I would love if, I could just operate like a computer, but I can't. And that's part of the reason of like being human, where it's then recognize the emotions, feeling them, but again, like not holding on to them to your point, and then making a decision. So then logic, right? About that instead of staying like within those feelings and emotions. And I bet that you're probably doing some of those things as you take a walk outside, right? For 15 to 30 minutes or
Correct.
things
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a logical extension of that, Paul, because you asked earlier about, building teams and training other people. I
Yeah.
think a logical extension of self is helping others do that too. Because when I bring a sales rep on and they have a bad day, a micromanager, a small little annoying part of me is going to be like, why didn't you make the calls today? Right? If I'm being
Mm-hmm.
honest. But that's not my job. My job is to help them figure out why they didn't make the calls today and help them motivate themselves. Like most salespeople, in order to be successful, need to be internally motivated, not externally. So if you can walk other people through an exercise or a thought process that helps them self-diagnose and then find their why and then take action, they're in a much better position for success no matter where they are in life, not just on your team.
Is it having a why? Have you found like that's the internally motivating thing that really, transcends all, and having a big enough why that it doesn't get like rocked by, small things?
I don't think having a why is absolutely essential.
Okay.
I know I know a lot of people, you ask, hey, why do you do what you do? And the answer is because I like helping people. It's
Mhm.
like that's pretty surface level. But if you keep on going further and further and further into it, usually there's some kind of emotional response, some kind of trauma, like mine, right? When I was kind of left out to dry in my first stint in my sales career.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I don't think having a why is critical. Some people just enjoy work and they enjoy the hustle. And that's an okay response too. But when we bring it to the surface and we talk about motivation, which is fleeting,
Mhm.
which is why it's
Mhm.
people do need a reason to take action and get themselves outside of a negative mindset so that they're ready to move and take some kind of action. I don't think a why is necessary for that. I think simply being in a position to recognize your mindset and fix it is what matters. A why certainly helps.
Yeah, interesting. I'll have to process that more because that's been something that has been my like kind of like North Star sort of aspect, right? I guess I've kind of done both, right? Now that I'm thinking about it, where it's like you have your North Star, the reason why, and that gets you out of like the really tough, difficult, impossible type moments.
Yeah.
And then in the, heat of it, it's like, okay, yeah, no, I need to tweak and change like, here right now. And so it's to say like love the walk and the journey that you're on, right? In the present moment, and also know like, where you're, going of sorts, or like why you're gonna, go there. Because I have some friends in Texas that are like, let's run across the state of Texas, right? And, it's to say like, well, why would you, do that? Is it because of, being acknowledged for it? Is it because of the people you're going to inspire, like you mentioned? But yeah, getting more into the depth of no, it's because, I believe that it's possible and I want to see if I can do it. Therefore, I'm going to do this seemingly crazy impossible thing, and sure, it also may and would and does inspire people as well to maybe run a mile or things like that. That's one thing I found is that even by I don't know, doing a podcast, like writing a book, like I don't know, some of maybe these big things that other people might think of like, wow, that's scary, unknown, what have you. And yeah, certainly it is at times. it's then to say that can inspire them to do their own thing, right? Not a runner, although, people in my circles have been inspired to, go run half marathons or marathons and things like that. And so really just letting like the human like capacity for what's possible just be kind of unlocked in other people of sorts is almost what comes to mind.
I'm sure you've heard of the quote by Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And it continues to say that as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously or subconsciously give others permission to shine their own. I'm paraphrasing, but it's an amazing quote. And I think it's a great reduction of what inspiration from person to person is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of something I'm in the process of building, of basically doing a like exercise kind of around it. So that way people could say, hey, this, like, what is your light, right? Like I think of the X-Men movie dude, Cyclops guy, right? That he has to keep the glasses on because he has like the light and he's like, I don't know. Where it's to say like, what are you like most scared of, like with the light? And sometimes like knowing your fear and naming your fear and getting more comfortable with it. If you're afraid of spiders and you're around a bunch of spiders, guess what? You're going to be less scared of spiders because you realize they aren't just going around biting you and things like that. And it's a powerful, just exercise to then just be with it and sit with it, to your point, right? Have the emotions around it, have kind of the exercise sort of piece you mentioned too, because otherwise it's just going to be always that fear and never something you like overcome or do. It's always going to be, 5 feet away sort of thing, for sure.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
So this is like the guide to joy, right? And so what would you put as like mantra, mindset, motto, quote, piece of inspiration, reflection in the guide?
Yeah. Do I have to pick one?
You're signing the guest book. So, draw a picture, take it as you are.
I think there's two, and I think one creates the other.
Cool.
First is, and I've mentioned it, but is do the work. And it doesn't just mean business. I do mean business, but it doesn't just mean business. This means marriage, your relationships. Things are hard in life, but pick your hard. It's hard being single. It's hard being married. Which one sounds better? Having a companion for life or being alone, right? So that's what I mean is do the work in everything that you do to take a next step. And by the next step, I mean life is living learning, right? Every single step you take is going to create an outcome that you can learn from and then therefore get better at again and then again and then again. And so it becomes this cycle where if you do the work, you're going to learn something. That's what life is. And then you do more work and then you learn something. So those are two things that I combine together in my day-to-day life that in my opinion result in constant learning and improvement.
Yeah, that's
also
incredible.
failure.
Also failure. Yeah, sprinkle a little bit, or in some cases, like, have a daily dose of it, right? And, try things not for the sake of like finding a failure, but, just swinging from the fences. And it's the concept of more reps and at bats than necessarily it is like, oh, I'm going to do something because I know it's going to fail. And just quick story to say that when I was in sales, there's a period of time where we were forced to make a certain number of dials a day. And I knew there were some contacts who, went to voicemail, didn't answer their phone. So yeah, there were some days where it was just like, yep, we're just going to call those people. Hey, I made my dials.
Right there, man.
Yeah. And so it's also to then say like, don't be surprised by the work that you do and are you doing the right work? It reminds me of the book 10X is easier than 2X, which I'm kind of referencing and sort of rereading right now.
I have it back here. Yeah.
Yeah. So incredible. Well, thanks for coming on, sharing wisdom and insight. Appreciate, who you are, what you do, and how you're doing it. So thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Paul. This is great. I appreciate you.
Yeah, definitely. If something resonated with you today, share it with a friend. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, leave a 5-star review. It's one of the best ways that I can know what and how I'm doing is being beneficial to you and your life as a listener. Thanks for joining. We'll see you on next episode.